Hello, everyone. Today we are not going to talk about corporate revenge, burning satellites, or tyrannical bosses. Today we are going to talk about what is left when life violently strips away the one thing you believed made you human. We are going to talk about the razor-thin line between giving up completely and reinventing yourself from scratch. I am going to tell you how the most absolute, devastating silence of my life eventually became my ultimate masterpiece. For 20 years, my name, Adrian, was plastered across the marquees of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. I didn't just play the piano, I lived, breathed, and existed through it. My right hand was famous in the classical community for its diabolical speed, capable of executing the most staggeringly complex passages of Liszt and Rachmaninoff with a precision that bordered on the inhuman. My hands were my tools, my voice, and my very soul. I lived in a glittering, fast-paced world of standing ovations, luxury hotel rooms, and musical scores that seemed to fly effortlessly beneath my fingertips. But 4 years ago, fate decided that my music needed to stop. A severe car accident on a blindingly rainy night changed the trajectory of my existence forever. There was no fire, no screaming. There was only the deafening crunch of twisting metal and, immediately after, a sepulchral, heavy silence. When I woke up in the stark white hospital room, the pain in my right arm was a constant, piercing scream. The surgeons did everything they possibly could, but the nerve damage was total and irreversible. My right hand, the very instrument that executed impossible trills and dizzying scales, was reduced to an inert, lifeless object. The nerves had been severed like old, frayed electrical wires. I could look at my fingers, but I couldn't feel them. I couldn't move a single millimeter of the hand that had given me everything I had ever loved. The virtuoso died on that rain-slicked highway. The first year following the accident was a steep, agonizing descent into hell. Imagine being a bird whose wings have been brutally clipped, forced to look up at the endless open sky every single day. I tried physical therapy, I subjected myself to experimental surgeries, but the final verdict from the top neurologists was always the same. Adrian, you need to accept that your performance career is over. Dedicate yourself to teaching music theory or conducting an orchestra. But the piano is simply no longer for you. I sold my custom grand piano. I couldn't bear to see it sitting in my living room, gleaming under the afternoon light, like a massive, silent, black reproach. I fell into a depression so deep and suffocating that time lost all meaning. I spent hours just staring at my right hand, sending desperate mental commands that my broken body simply ignored. I felt like a severely detuned instrument, a broken tool that the world no longer had any use for. The phone stopped ringing. The friends from the music industry, the ones who always surrounded me when I was winning international awards, vanished into thin air. I was left entirely alone with my silence and my dead arm resting heavily in a medical sling. One gloomy afternoon, my 6-year-old niece came over to visit. She found a dusty, cheap electronic keyboard tucked away in the back of a closet and innocently asked me to play a song for her. "I can't, sweetheart," I told her with a cracked, hollow voice I didn't even recognize as my own. "My hand is broken." She looked up at me with that crushing, undeniable logic that only children possess and simply said, "Well, why don't you just use the other one? You still have a whole hand left, Uncle Adrian." That simple, direct sentence struck me like a bolt of lightning in the middle of my darkest night. That very same night, I pulled out the dusty electronic keyboard. I sat down in front of the keys. For my entire life, my left hand had always been the accompaniment. It was the hand that kept the rhythm, the one that played the heavy bass notes, the one that supported the true star of the show, the right hand. I looked down at my left hand. It was strong, it was healthy, but it was incredibly clumsy when it came to carrying a delicate melody. I tried to play a simple, slow Chopin nocturne. It was an absolute disaster. I broke down crying out of sheer, overwhelming frustration. It felt like trying to write a complex novel using only your feet, but something deep inside my stubborn core ignited. I went to the Music University's library and searched for a long-forgotten dusty section, repertoire for the left hand alone. I discovered that I was not the first to face this impossible challenge. Paul Wittgenstein, a brilliant pianist who lost his right arm in World War I, had commissioned works from the greatest composers of his time just so he could keep playing. I began to train. I am not talking about practicing for a casual hour a day. I am talking about a grueling, Spartan training regimen of 12 hours a day. I had to physically rewire my brain to teach my left hand to do the work of two. I had to learn how to leap across the entire length of the keyboard with superhuman speed and pinpoint precision. I had to learn to use the sustain pedal in such a subtle, masterful way that I could create the acoustic illusion of 10 fingers playing when there were actually only 5. The fingertips on my left hand became covered in painful blisters, my tendons screamed in agony, but for the first time in years, the suffocating silence in my house had been replaced by music. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The news that the one-armed pianist was attempting a comeback eventually reached the ears of the music critics. One of them, a bitter man named Valerio who had always envied my early success, wrote a cruel, scathing article. Adrian is trying to evoke pity. The piano is strictly a two-handed instrument. Playing with only one hand is nothing but a cheap circus trick, a pathetic, desperate shadow of what he once was. That cruel review was the exact rocket fuel I needed. I decided right then and there that I wasn't going to play pieces written by others. I was going to compose my very own suite, a work so incredibly complex, so rich in acoustic textures, and so technically demanding that no two-handed pianist alive could ever say it was missing anything. I titled it The Resilience Suite. I soon faced a new, daunting problem. The prestigious conservatories and concert halls absolutely refused to book me. They claimed that the audience paid to see a flawless spectacle, not a disabled man struggling and suffering over a keyboard. So, I employed my own personal brand of malicious compliance. I took my very last life savings and independently rented the exact same grand theater where I had made my debut 20 years ago. I didn't advertise it as a concert for one hand. I boldly billed it as The Return of Adrian, the Sound of Silence. I prepared myself physically like an Olympic athlete. I strengthened my back, my left shoulder, and my core. I learned how to throw the entire weight of my body behind my single arm to project the sound to the back of the hall. My left hand transformed into a spider of steel, capable of playing a sweet, delicate melody in the high treble notes and, a split millisecond later, leaping down to the bass to strike a thunderous chord. I was ready to prove to the entire world that music does not reside in the fingers, it resides in the sheer force of human will. Opening night arrived. The theater was completely sold out, filled half out of morbid curiosity and half out of lingering respect. When I walked out onto the brightly lit stage, the silence was absolute and heavy. The audience stared at my right arm, strapped tightly to my body, completely motionless. A low murmur of discomfort rippled through the crowd. I sat down on the leather piano bench. I closed my eyes, blocking out the world. The very first note of the Resilience Suite was a low, impossibly deep C that made the wooden floorboards of the theater vibrate. And then, my left hand began to fly. These weren't desperate, frantic leaps. It was a continuous, torrential flow of pure music. In the fast-paced allegro sections, my 5 fingers moved with a blinding agility that I never even possessed when I had the use of both hands. I created massive overlapping layers of sound, perfectly feathering the pedal to sustain the deep bass notes while my hand danced wildly across the upper register of the keyboard. Halfway through the concert, I opened my eyes and spotted Valerio, the critic, sitting in the third row. His jaw had practically dropped to the floor. He wasn't watching a disabled man, he was listening to an acoustic phenomenon that had never been heard before. The music had a desperate urgency, a raw power, and a fiery rage that simply didn't exist during my years as a perfect virtuoso. At the end of the final movement, a wild, sweeping crescendo that tore across the piano from end to end, I struck the final, deafening chord and let the heavy echo slowly fade into the velvet walls of the room. 10 agonizing seconds of total silence passed. For a brief moment, I thought I had failed. And then, suddenly, the theater erupted. It was an earth-shattering standing ovation that lasted for 15 straight minutes. People were openly weeping. The professional musicians in the orchestra seats were standing on their feet. I had proven that a piano doesn't need 10 fingers. It only needs a heart that absolutely refuses to stop beating. Today, my career is actually more successful than it ever was before. I don't travel the world proving how fast I am. I travel to show people how far you can go when you lose absolutely everything. My right hand remains motionless, but I no longer look at it with hatred or regret. I look at it as a constant reminder that I had to be broken in order to finally sound real. I have since founded an academy for musicians with severe physical injuries, teaching them that an instrument is just a piece of wood and metal, but the music is the air we actively choose to breathe. Because at the end of the day, the greatest triumph isn't returning to who you used to be, it's discovering that you can become someone far stronger than you ever imagined. If you liked it, hit the like button and subscribe for more.